Welcome to Keen on Retirement, a show dedicated to helping you thrive before and during your retirement years. If you are looking to grow and protect your wealth and want to make the second half of your life the best half, then listen in as wealth advisor Bill Keen sorts through the key issues that you need to know in a lively and candid way.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Keen on Retirement. I'm your co-host, Steve Sandusky, and with me, as always, is Bill Keen and Matt Wilson. Well, guys, it's summertime, and what that means is it's barbecue time, open house at Keen Wealth Advisors. So I understand there was a big shindig out there recently. So tell me a little bit about that.
Man, yeah. So a few weeks ago now, we had our annual barbecue. It's become a tradition here at the firm. It continues to get to grow and attract participants, and as the Keen team continues to grow as well. It's just one of the most. I'm just so proud of the team. The professional level, every detail is tended to, and folks just had a wonderful time. Over the years, too, we've made it more of a family affair. So we really want folks to bring kids, grandkids, great-grandkids, and really enjoy the all of the different things that we have for them, the activities. And again, I think this year, Matt, we had more adults do the face painting and get balloons made than the kids. But there were quite a few on all fronts. And of course, the KC Wolf is there each year, which really brings some energy. That's the mascot for the Chiefs. Steve, if you don't remember who the KC Wolf is. But I believe we had something around 550 folks come through the check-in, didn't we, Matt?
We did. Yeah, it was our largest one that we've hosted, which is great. I mean, that's what we want. We want it to grow and expand every year. We're always thinking of new ideas, things to do to enhance the experience for everyone. Yeah, and fortunately, the weather was just perfect. We actually had, was it a tornado watch on Monday? Lots of rain and definitely some strong winds came through Monday, Tuesday, and then here's Wednesday, and it was just perfect weather. Not too hot. Sun was out. It was nice.
74 and sunny. Yeah, the prior day, folks were taking cover really on Monday and Tuesday, and we just, I guess I say that right. Living pays off every so often, Steve.
Yeah, that's right. So how was the food?
Well, we had Jack Stack Barbecue, and they come 3 or 4 or 5 trucks strong out there, and they know what they're doing, and they've got it ready to go. So that was incredible as usual. We had a lot of feedback on that, and we also had a different ice cream provider today. One of our clients' grandsons, who I've known for many years since he was 9. I was speaking with him there. Great young man. He's got a business. It's a very nice business. Matt, what's the official name of the business?
Gosh,
is it One More Scoop?
I believe so. I'll have to look that up.
Did a great job. Brought his operation out there. He's got wholesale business and a lot of other parts of his business, but did a fantastic job there. He let me know. I think I heard that over 650 scoops were taken.
Yeah.
So that tells me that folks were double dipping, so to speak, which is fine. That's all good.
Did that include you two? Are you two ice creamers?
Well, I've been laying low on that, but he personally brought me one when the event was over, about 8:20 or so. He walked up and said, would you like one? And of course I took him up on it. So
yeah, same for me. But yeah, it was, we're so bit. It's just the day the event flies by, for, I think everyone on our team, but yeah, you stand there and you talk and you look up, it's been 4 hours. It's crazy how quick it goes.
Good. Well, yeah, time flies when you're having fun, as the old cliche goes. And so we're going to segue from one fun topic to another topic, which is tax policy. So Congress has been busy here trying to come up with some new tax policy, and the Republicans have passed a new proposed tax bill in the House. It's now in the Senate, and they're having their conversations about it. So yeah, we wanted to take a moment here and talk a little bit about what's in there. And while the stuff isn't final in terms of what will actually get passed through Congress, we have a pretty good outline, I think, of where this is heading. And so it makes sense to have a conversation today, even though things are not totally finalized. So Matt, why don't you maybe set some additional context here for how we should be thinking about the new tax changes that are working their way through Washington.
Yeah, and this isn't surprising that there's a proposed tax bill working its way through the government, because the last one that we had under President Trump was in 2017. He passed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and it had a lot of the provisions were set to expire or sunset at the end of this year. So we were expecting that that some sort of adjustments either to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, whether it's extensions, things that are signed into law to make permanent, and what else would they like to amend or change to it. So these are we'll talk through kind of things that are already in play or currently law that will extend or become permanent if passed, and then others that are new to everyone. This, as Steve mentioned, this is definitely not set in stone. Yeah, this will have to make its way through Congress, or it's made its way through the House. Now it's going to go through the Senate, and we'll definitely see some adjustments. But the general idea of what they're talking about most likely won't change significantly. It's more about just some of the things on the margins to get passed, because part of what they're supposed to be doing is balancing the budget as they project out what this is all going to cost over the next 10 years, and you've got to make all the math work according to rules within Congress. Never seems like the math works out the way anyone ever expected or anticipated, but hey, that's just how it works, I guess.
Well, we know that the budget debt will never be paid. The debt will never be paid.
The debt will not, and the fact that the government's supposed to run a balanced budget never happens and will never happen in the future. I think we've talked about it's happened maybe 6 or 7 times over the last 50 years.
So it actually has happened a time or two, a few times,
where
the budget was that. And when we speak of the debt and deficit, it's interesting to make sure we make it's kind of like when you talk about Medicare and Medicaid, you have to, for most people that don't study this stuff, they say they don't know what the difference between Medicare and Medicaid is. Well, the deficit and the debt, people don't, what's the difference? The deficit is the annual budget. Is it in deficit or is there in surplus? The annual budget, like you're spending each year. The debt is the sum collective total of all the debt that's accumulated over many, many years. Yeah. So that's when we talk about that, that's the definitions there. Yeah. So anyway, are you saying we're not going to balance the budget this year, Matt? I guess.
Well, they're supposed to. We'll see what actually happens. They seem to try, but again, it never seems to work out the way the projections come in. But let's talk through some of the pieces to this bill. And I haven't seen a name for it yet. I think President Trump calls it the Big Beautiful Tax Bill. I don't think that's the name that they're going to agree to calling it. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that was the one in 2017. This one is, I guess they determine that as when they sign it into law. What are they actually going to name the bill? It'll be fun to watch what they come up with.
It'll be something clever, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they spend probably more time and energy figuring out a clever name than actual talking through the details of this sometimes.
Although Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the first one was just kind of what it was, though, I guess, right? Yeah. It wasn't too outlandish, but
no. Some of these we've had, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Secure Act and CARES Act. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one of the key provisions of this new tax bill is to continue the tax bracket structure that was set in place with the passing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. So there was 7 brackets, which that's what it was before, but they all reduced slightly, with the top bracket being 37%. Used to be, I think, 39.6 prior to the passing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Well, those same 7 brackets will stay if this passes in this format, will stay exactly the way they are, the way they were in 2014, or excuse me, 2024. With those 7 brackets. Now, what does change every single year, and we talk about this is not part of the tax bill, but it's the income thresholds that get you into those tax brackets. Those adjust every single year, but the actual percentage tax you pay when you get into those thresholds is what's not changing.
There was some talk about adding that 39.6 back again as the highest bracket for those over 1 million in taxable earnings, but I do not think it made it into this edition of the bill.
Yeah, nothing has come through with that on this bill. Another continuation, and really, the way I'm reading this is that that 7 bracket structure, those percentage tax at the federal tax level would be made permanent. There isn't a sunset like there was with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Now, as part of that too, that passing of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, they eliminated the personal exemptions, and it was almost 10 years ago, so I don't expect people to remember what the tax code back then, but you used to get what's called a personal exemption. So it was all the people that you were claiming on your tax return. There was a dollar amount that added up, and that got added to your standard deduction, which increased the amount of tax-free income that you received. Well, they eliminated the personal exemptions in 2017, and they increased the standard deduction and essentially really doubled it. And that made it such that most people don't itemize anymore. I think last figures that I've seen is about 95% of all taxpayers, tax filers, do not itemize, which means they don't have expenses over and above the standard deduction that would allow them to claim a larger deduction. That would continue. So part of this new bill is to say, continue that double of the standard deduction and make it permanent from the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. However, they did throw in a little bonus. So from 2025 through 2028, there would be an increased standard deduction of $1,000 if you're single, $2,000 if you're married. So just for a few years, while President Trump is in office, you would receive that bonus again if this passes the way that it's written. Now, all along those same lines, they also made a bonus standard deduction, and only available from 2025 through 2028 for those that are over age 65. So this would impact a lot of our retired clients. And so this is only if you claim the standard deduction, and it exists today. They have this additional standard deduction for those that are over age 65, and it gets added to the standard deduction. If you itemize and it's much larger, well then, yeah, you don't get this. This is only added to those that claim the standard deduction. And this bonus would be $4,000 per person on the tax return. So a married couple, there'd be potentially 2 people from 2025 to 2028. Now, it would phase out once your modified adjusted gross income, if you're single, increased, it would phase out starting at $75,000. If you're married, it would phase out at $150,000. So, you know what? And actually, I'm seeing a little caveat to this. It would, while during this 4-year period, it would be available even if you did itemize. So, yeah.
If that was bantered and not made it or not, but I saw in another piece earlier that you could itemize and still get that bonus piece. But it was I think they called it a below the line deduction. That's right. Now we're getting probably too detailed for the scope of our course here. But anyway, that's an interesting way of adding a bonus deduction there for folks.
Yeah, I mean, these aren't huge amounts, but what you'll see in some of these that we're going to talk through is that they're good, but they do have phase outs. So they don't necessarily apply once your income gets over a certain certain threshold, or you get less and less of it as your income increases.
I'm going to steal your thunder on the getting a deduction for auto loan interest. I remember way back when you got deductions for credit card interest. Remember that, Steve? Mm-hmm. Now, I never had any credit cards, being the financially, responsible person I am, even when I was younger. Maybe there was a few back in the early days, but you could remember that when credit card
interest to get the.
You had to pay the interest, of course, yes, to get the deduction. But they're talking auto. But maybe I'm getting you out of your order now. But again, you talked about these things being phased out. It looked like if once you get over a certain income level, that gets phased out as well. Auto loan interest. Mm-hmm. Most of this stuff gets phased out once you make over a few $100,000. But nonetheless,
this is a new provision. So this was not. Did not exist prior to to this addition to this bill, but they are suggesting or they're discussing this in Congress right now, is deducting up to $10,000 of auto loan interest on U.S. assembled vehicle loans.
So important that it's U.S. there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how they define what that means, how much of it has to be assembled in U.S. or I'm sure they have the car dealers will tell you what's eligible and not eligible for that, assuming this passes. I mean, I could see something like this passing. This is only for 4 years. It's not a permanent or not a long-term item within the tax code, but it phases out if you're single at $100,000 and married $200,000. So again, higher income people, this wouldn't necessarily apply to. And again, it's interest too. You have to finance it. You have to pay the interest. It's not just for paying cash.
Right. Now, you have mentioned that several of these items end in 2028.
Yes.
They sunset. So tell me about why that is. Is there some strategy behind 2028?
I believe, well, the biggest, what you can see, at least what's public with, when they propose these tax bills, is they have to indicate, well, does this increase, is this an expense or is this an inflow? Like where does it, and they project, okay, this is going to raise $1 trillion in taxes over the next 10 years, or this is going to cost $200 billion in taxes over the next 10 years, whatever that is. Well, if it's only for 4 years, that number is going to be much less, especially if it's an expense or a cost. So that's, what I believe where they're starting at. Now, there's probably some theories that it's like, well, that Trump just wants it when he's in office, and then whenever he's not in office anymore, make the new administration deal with it then. They got to balance it all out. So I don't know if there's any validity to Trump just wanting it for him and not it for anyone else. But there's definitely some discussion that that's part of why it ends in 4 years when his term's up.
Yeah, and I think to your point there, it'll be interesting that the expiration, as you say, coincides with the end of Trump's term, and that means Congress is going to have to decide: are we going to extend this like during the primary season?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's going to be a big political battle that people will have to be talking about as they're running for president and Congress and everything. So yeah, that'll be quite a time as we get to the second half. Well, basically probably all throughout 2028, because it's going to take a while to get all this negotiated, which we don't want to get too political here, but you think about the midterm elections.
Yeah.
That's going to be a big factor. Whoever controls Congress in the midterm elections coming up is going to have the upper hand in terms of what they're going to do with these items here that sunset in 2028. So
yeah. I mean, that's
definitely some strategy in there, I think, too.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it's majority of these are really for just a short amount of time. Another one that's a continuation was the child tax credit. So $2,000 per child, that would be made permanent. But then there would be an extra increase for, from 2025 to 2028 of $500. So it'd be $2,500 for those that qualify. So again, kind of a short-term bonus, but a long-term made permanent on that. This made it into the bill. So There was a lot of discussion during campaigning around no tax on Social Security and no tax on tips. Well, there's nothing in the bill regarding Social Security, and not necessarily surprising, because that is a very long-term, large issue item that should require probably some in-depth discussions before it's just, hey, we're not going to tax it anymore. It's like, 'cause there's a lot of impacts when that tax revenue is not there, because the tax revenue from the tax that you pay on your Social Security does go back into the trust fund. So definitely something that requires a little bit more thoughtfulness. But what did make it into this bill is no tax on overtime. It's only for 4 years, and it would be phased out for incomes over 160,000. So, if you were earning a good amount there, and part of it was overtime, then yeah, that wouldn't, it would phase out on that portion. There's you hear a lot of discussion around, well, what about the people who don't earn, they just pay, they make 150K. It's not overtime. It's whatever. Like, why is the focus on overtime? Or, this no tax on tips too. That was another thing that was discussed. Why is the focus on that versus just income? Because it's like, based on your job, are they trying to incent people to go into certain jobs? Maybe, but it doesn't necessarily call that out. So interesting, some of that, and those could be things that are maybe not make it through in the way it's written through the Senate, just because it is so specific to a specific type of worker. Let's see here. Another big one that that we see our clients utilize a lot are 529 accounts. So there was some expansions of that through the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and even be able to convert some of the money to a Roth IRA over time. Once you've had the money in there long enough, that's all existed, and that would continue. But they're also looking at expanding the use of 529s for homeschooling, tutoring, credentials, like such as the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner. You could use it for the expenses related to that. Special needs therapies, also continuing education for those professional licenses. So, I know for us as myself as a CFP, every year I've got to do continuing education, but also there's a cost to that. And then there's a cost for, renewals every year too, which doesn't necessarily specifically mention renewals, but I wonder if that would fall in that or not. The health savings accounts, those are great types of accounts that we utilize and recommend to a lot of clients that are still working and have access to the type of plan that qualifies for a health savings account. So a health savings account is basically the ability for you to save in a very really the most tax efficient way. It's exempt from FICA tax, exempt from your earnings, and exempt from income tax when you withdraw. So they call it kind of triple tax exempt, which is phenomenal. Hardly anything is exempt as much as those are, but you have to have a high deductible healthcare plan to be eligible to put money into a health savings account. So just, again, depends on what plan you're on, and what your employer has for you, or what you're choosing on the healthcare exchanges if you're able to utilize these accounts. But they're doubling the contribution limits, that's a big deal, which I think is a good thing, because they're wanting to encourage people to save for healthcare expenses. You can put the money in and take it out the same year. You'd still get the same benefits. But a lot of times, as those accounts build, you're able to invest them, especially over and above the deductible of your healthcare plan. Typically, they'll withhold that in money market or cash, and then the rest can be invested. And we can see some very large balances that people have access to pay for, especially if they didn't use it while they're working, pay for their Medicare premiums, any kind of health related expense in retirement.
Now that doubling, though, it looks like it is limited by income. And
that's
so,
right.
Yeah. So if you're single, it'll double as long as you're single and making under 75,000. And it'll double if you're married as long as you're making under 150,000.
Yeah.
So that's going to phase out for higher income earners.
And yeah, another big phase out, which, there's always talk during, among the members of Congress on when these tax bills come out. Hey, this is just a tax cut for the rich or whatever. And you can see in a lot of these are available to those that are, you would say, up until they hit middle class. It isn't something that's gonna, for folks that are making in that couple $100,000 plus range, it's just these aren't going to be available to them. Another one that's a commonly discussed item that among us and our clients is the estate tax. So what
exemption
is, the exemption and how big is it or how little is it? Because estate tax, so that applies currently if you have a net worth over, what's it this year?
It's 14 now.
14 million.
Yes.
That's per person, so you can double it for a couple, and there's ways where you structure your assets so if one spouse dies, predeceases the other, that captures their kind of credit or the exemption for them, and then the rest. Now, 14 million doesn't apply to a lot of people. There's not a huge percentage of the population that has a individual net worth that high, or double that, 28 million for a couple. But people think, well, okay, well, how come if you have that much money, why, or if you have less than that, I guess you don't have to pay this estate tax? And the idea being, well, so the tax is 40%. And right
plus
now,
states
plus the state,
that are different.
States have the estate tax at $1 million. So I mean, you pay the state tax, even though you may be exempt from the federal estate tax.
State estate, estate tax, plus federal.
Missouri and Kansas, they don't have any, so it doesn't. They just follow. A lot of them just follow what the federal government does. They don't apply unless it's over those thresholds. And if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act were to sunset, or if this provision wasn't part of this tax bill, it would drop down to $7 million per person in 2026. Well, now they would raise it. This provision would raise it to 15 million per person, 30 million per couple, starting in 2026, and then of course index it for inflation, which is what they had been doing for all these years. Is that they increase it ever so slightly with inflation and what the CPI comes in at. This isn't necessarily a big tax. It doesn't generate a lot of tax revenue, so it's easy for the government to continue to extend these exemptions. And basically, it's just how much can you pass to the next generation or to someone else without any estate tax associated with it? And it is a very large, hurdle, which I think is good. I mean, you'd be taxed. That'd be a lot of tax to pay. And there's tools if someone does have an estate that is worth $100 million plus. I mean, you're over these exemption amounts to where you can buy certain types of life insurance that would cover the tax bill. Now, those aren't inexpensive. There's a cost to it, but it is a way to minimize at least your out-of-pocket costs when you do pass away in terms of the estate tax.
Some of my wealthier friends, Matt, just to share with our listeners and viewers today, that are over these limits basically have said their documents drafted such that the assets up to the limits can go on to the next generation and maybe the next one after that, kids and grandkids. But other than that, they're donating everything else to charity. I mean, they're going to lose 40+% of it anyway to estate tax. So at that point, they just said, this is more than just one or two people now. This is like, I'm seeing more and more people adopt this. Now, everybody's different on their journey and how their relationship to their resources and their legacy. But I've seen as these have gotten larger. Now you're talking $30 million between two people, so that's a large amount of money that can go to the next generation or two. But then anything over that, more people than you would think are donating everything else to the charitable causes they think are close to their heart. Interesting, isn't it? And then it just they don't worry about paying estate tax at that point.
Yeah.
So,
and as long
and
as
by the way, these estate, when Matt mentions this estate tax exemption, it's not just at your death. This is also money that you can give away while you're living, or a combination of both. And I don't know. We're not going to address that $19,000 here today, but we're kind of on the topic. Each person can give $19,000 a year to anyone they want without having to track it against that $15 million. So when we talk about that, we have lots of clients that say, how much can we give to our kids this year without having to track it? Or they think it triggers a tax. It doesn't trigger a tax. It would just go against this $15 million lifetime exemption that you have. So you'd have to start carrying a certain tax form, I don't recall it right now, that would track how much over $19,000, that's this year now, you can give without having to track it. So interesting to just know that. And a lot of people choose to go ahead and give, like they might think, hey, this 15 million is a big number. It might go down from here. Let's go ahead and do our whole lifetime gift in this given year. Now we're talking about it's a little bit more advanced estate planning, legacy strategies, but interesting to see how this thing, when I got in the industry, this was 600,000. Steve, you might recall in the early 90s, it was 600,000. So it was hitting a ton of people. We're going to have to pay estate tax. So it's come a long way in 30 plus years.
Yeah, it is interesting to see, how this has evolved. And as Bill mentioned, it's people, you can capture it at any time, and some choose to do so because they feel like, it could change and make it could be worse in the future. So they'd rather capture it. And the way it works is whenever you capture it, you're locked in. They don't go back and say, well, sorry, the law changed, so now you're going to have to pay you have to pay a bunch of tax on it. And really the tracking, it's like, they don't feel like it's worth the hassle of anything under 19,000 because, it'd be a lot of paperwork and, things like that. But if it gets large enough, they do want to know, are you giving money, to the next generation or to someone else that is getting your estate down into such a way to avoid this estate tax? Again,
picking away at it at 19,000 at a time isn't.
If you've got enough money, it's probably not putting too big of a dent in it.
Right. And also the thing about that is if it's a married couple, let's say, they can each give 19,000 to anybody. So if you're mom and dad and you got 3 kids, mom can give 19,000 to each of the 3 kids. Dad can give 19,000 to each of the 3 kids. So
and their spouses, Steve.
And their spouses and their children. So it's like, keep giving me the 19,000. I love everybody.
That's right. That's right. The other piece to this, which is not part of the tax bill, is that there's also a step up in basis that's available to every single person. So people might hear this and think, well, they just care about, whatever, these high exemptions for rich folks. But again, it's if you have a very large estate, you're going to have to figure out a way to either give the money away or pay the tax. But this step up in cost basis, this is available to every single person. And it's when someone passes away, their beneficiaries, they receive a step up in basis in any of their assets that are not retirement accounts that have, tax deferral associated with them, such as, real estate or brokerage accounts. So if someone bought a piece of property for $100,000 and it's worth $1 million, well, if you, as the owner who purchased it, sold it, you'd have to pay capital gains tax on that difference. But if you pass away and leave it to your children, their new cost basis is exactly what it was worth when you passed away, $1 million. And if they sell it for $1 million, they pay no tax. And that still exists. And that's not part of the tax bill that's changing.
Now you're talking the, getting out of paying capital gains tax, but we were talking estate tax before. So there's estate, capital gains, income, all this stuff can add up too. So
the, This last piece, this is interesting. So there is what's called MAGA accounts for children. So up to $5,000 per year can be contributed to these accounts for kids under 8. The government would deposit $1,000 from 2025 through 2028 for those folks that are born in those years. And those funds can be used for college, down payment on a home. If it's a small business, they could have access to it with very little tax. So interesting, tool to help. A lot of it maybe is our grandparents, can they use this for their grandchildren? That's a little bit more flexible than a 529, because that's part of the the arguments against a 529 is it has to be used for these very specific use cases. And if you're just unsure and you'd like to save money for something else, well, maybe this type of account could help with that.
And do those grow tax? Are those like triple tax free? They grow tax deferred. They are not taxable when you pull out, and you get a tax deduction for the person contributing. Is that how that works?
Yeah, I was not able to find the specifics on those, unfortunately. So yeah, there'll be more clarity to come if it does pass, exactly how that'll work. It's not uncommon to have things pass within the tax bills that don't have every little detail spelled out. For example, when the 529s, when the law was passed that allowed them to basically be converted to Roth IRAs over a period of time, there was a lot of questions on, well, can you change the beneficiary, or can you, how long does it have to be open? What about contributions? How long do those have to stay in there? That they have since clarified, because it was phased in over a couple of years. It wasn't just automatically available to people. So there's definitely more clarity to come on a lot of these. One, as they do pass the law, we will hold a webinar once all the laws are passed and talk through, here's exactly what this means for you and how all this works. So yeah, to be determined.
Okay. So Matt, are there any other, I know there's other changes that are happening, but any that are relevant to our audience? Because I do have one other sort of bigger picture question I want to ask you about.
Sure.
To this.
Yeah, those were the ones that, when I looked at it, kind of made sense for our audience. There's some things related to businesses and, business deductions and things like that. But yeah, these are the big ones.
Okay. So what I want to ask you is, give me the strategic view of the tax bill here. And of course, maybe some changes here as it runs through the Senate. But what's sort of the bigger picture vision of what the government is trying to accomplish with this type of tax policy? And also, it looks like, as it's currently written, the nonpartisan bookkeepers are basically saying this might be upwards of close to $4 trillion of additional debt over the time of this policy.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on the sort of the big picture? What are we trying to accomplish with this bill?
Well, when I look at it and think about it, it's whether does this stimulate the economy or does it make the economy contract? Because, that's really what would happen as a result. So if people have more money, more income after taxes, so, that's disposable income. The more disposable income they have, the more money that's available to go to save or to go spend. And as folks that have listened to my webinars and heard me speak about this on our podcasts over the years, it's like we're a consumer-based economy and people spend, and the more people spend, basically the more revenue shows up for corporations, and that flows through the tax for the corporations and shows up as earnings. And stock prices are a function of earnings. So would this be a boost or a stimulative aspect to to the economy and to the stock market? Potentially. That's always that kind of bottom line, is how does that impact? And if it is stimulative, that's where they outweigh, well, what's the benefit of that versus the cost, which would be increased deficit, increased debt, assuming, again, that's all things being equal, what they know today, that would be the cost of it. And do the costs outweigh the benefits? That's only time will tell. But so far, it's like there's a balancing act within the tax code, because too high isn't good. Zero isn't really going to work. There's just too many expenses, especially, necessary expenses that you have to pay that do have a cost associated with them. So where is that balancing act? And that's why we have two parties, and, maybe even additional parties too that aren't as popular, that are always arguing about it. no one's on the same page. That's why this is a thing that is always talked about, because some believe less tax, others believe more tax. I mean, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this year, although arguably they argue about this every year, which is the size of the budget deficit and the cumulative federal debt, as Bill was talking about here to start the show, that I think is like the key tension point here in the House and in the Senate. You definitely still have some number of Republicans who are fiscal hawks and they want to see a lower budget deficit. And so I think that's the tension that we're going to see here. Both parties just spend crazy, right? I mean, doesn't matter if you're Republican, Democrat, or whatever. Both parties like to run big deficits because, we like to give money to people. And those deficits ultimately end up in the financial markets. And I think that's certainly one of the things that's helped the markets over time is those, that deficit spending finds its way into markets as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But I sense it's probably going to be fairly close to what came out of the House.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit of deficit reduction built into it, but still pretty high deficits from the bill. Yeah. Bill, anything to add?
Yeah. Well, no, I just think about these things that we talk about. This is somewhere close to our 250th episode, which is just unbelievable for me as I reflect back on the 10 years that we've been approximately 10 years we've been producing the show and all the engagement we've had over these so many years and decade now. But we always come back to how do these things that we're speaking about, and why are we even speaking about them in the first place? Well, I mean, they're interesting for sure. And you can turn on the television and hear a lot of different opinions. You just shared a couple as you guys had your interchange there in the last few minutes about the way that the parties go back and forth. But how does it affect the listeners on the ground in the trenches that we work with? And why are we talking about it in the first place? Well, because we believe every single person that exists that has to deal with financial resources, and we live in a material world. We know money doesn't buy happiness outright, they say, fully, but we all have to deal with resources, with dollars, and be good stewards of those resources. And we believe the only way to do it is to have a comprehensive financial plan that's shepherded alongside of a client with an objective third party that's a fiduciary. And you have to know the rules. You have to know the rules of engagement when you're dealing with things like taxes and regulations. And that's why we like to stay on top of things. And we do stay on top of things very, very closely. In fact, we're staying on top of it so closely now that it hasn't even been settled yet what it's going to be. But we're giving you today a piece of what it might be. A good part of what Matt shared today is probably what will get passed, but there will be some adjustments around the fringes. But having somebody pay attention to these things, that's why we say we feel as if we have job security, it seems, Matt, because there will always be turmoil, there will always be change, there will always be things to follow, and our checklists that we go through each year for every family that we have the privilege of serving, those evolve as well as the rules and regulations change, and we apply those checklists to each and every client that we deal with to make sure that they're taking advantage of the things that are out there that they can take advantage of, and that they're avoiding the costly mistakes that if they weren't paying attention, they might get ensnared in. So we believe every person should have a financial plan, and that gives you the freedom and the confidence to go live your life, and spend guilt-free, but spend within your means and really enjoy things. Today is some of the detail about some of those things that we go through. So I appreciate you walking us through it. And Steve, you always have very quality questions. I might tell our listeners that a lot of questions Steve peppers us with. Most of them he hasn't told us about beforehand. After 250 episodes, we've learned how to deal with his difficult questioning. And at your age, Steve, you're perfect. You're like the average age of our listeners. Yeah. So I think it's great. But we have a lot of young listeners too. So I need to look at the demographics of that. Maybe
that's
closer.
Right. All right. I'm keeping you guys on your toes. That's for sure. All right, guys. Well, again, as always, thank you. Great show. And for each of you listening, please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. If you don't already, please tell all your friends and colleagues about the show. We want to continue to get more people listening to it. There's also a Keen Wealth Advisors YouTube channel, so you can watch the video of these if you want to see our bright, shiny, smiling faces here. So we would appreciate that as well. And like those episodes as well, because the more people that are liking those YouTube episodes, the more widely the YouTube algorithm is going to share that. So
that's right.
As we always say, part of our mission is to help increase financial literacy out there. So we want more people watching these shows as well. So as always, appreciate everybody. Thanks. And we'll talk to you on the next episode of Keen on Retirement.
Right. Thank you, guys.
The Steve Sandusky Advisor Network and Belay Advisor are not affiliated with Keen Wealth Advisors. Opinions expressed by Steve are his own and not necessarily the opinions of Keen Wealth Advisors. Keen Wealth Advisors is an SEC-registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Keen Wealth Advisors and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. The contents of this podcast are intended for the residents of the United States of America. No advice may be rendered by Keen Wealth Advisors unless a client service agreement is in place. This program is intended for informational purposes only and should not be construed as advice on or a recommendation of any particular investment, strategy, or as tax or legal advice for your specific situation. Keen Wealth Advisors is not a tax or legal advisor. To determine which investments may be appropriate for you, consult your licensed professional prior to investing. Information in this program was compiled from sources believed to be reliable. Due to the constant state of data changing, we do not guarantee the timeliness or the accuracy of the information provided. Our views or opinions at the time you are listening to the podcast may be different than they were when the podcast was recorded. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Any indices referenced for comparison are unmanaged and cannot be invested into directly. Any prices that are referenced or market forecasts are as of the date stated and are not necessarily our opinions moving forward. As always, please remember, investing involves risk and possible loss of principal capital. This podcast is not allowed to be copied, distributed, published, or reproduced without permission from Keen Wealth Advisors.